Hello, Automating Success followers. I'm your host, Joe Langton today. Today I have Adam Sandman with me today, and I'm going to go ahead and let Adam introduce himself. Really happy to have him on the show. Adam, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Joe. It's great to be on the show. My name is Adam Sandman, and I'm the founder and CEO of Inflectra Corporation. We're a software company that helps other companies develop software faster, better, with high quality, and help them reduce risk.
Awesome. So something I saw that I want to get right into. So uh, I see you started programming when you were 10 years old. Now
That's
this
true.
I can't fathom this. So kind of tell me how that happened. So let's get right into that.
Okay, no, and it's interesting because I was very fortunate. I was born and dating myself here, the mid 70s, and when I was about 10 years old, home computers were brand new. So we were talking the early 80s. And if I'd been born much earlier, this wouldn't have probably happened. And much later, and maybe I'd have been doing video games or something else. But it was right at the cusp of when home computers were released. And so when they first came out in the early 80s, if you wanted to do anything with a computer, you had to write the code for it because it didn't come with much. So nowadays, if you buy a computer, it comes with so much functionality, you just use it. But in those days, if you wanted to do something more than just play games, you had to write the software yourself. So just needs, and the fact that I grew up in South Wales in Great Britain, which is very rainy, and you're inside, unlike where you are most of the time. I went to the library and I would have a computer, and it was something to do. So it was both entertainment. It was also to make this computer actually perform and useful things. I had to actually learn to program it. And also in my school, we just got a whole bunch of these computers, and the teachers didn't know what to do with them either. And so they turned to me and were like, well, we have this computer and we'd like to be able to do some things when the parents come in 6 months from now for a parents' evening to show we're a technology focused, not high school even, I guess it was middle school, elementary school. And so I was able to help them do things with their touch keys, and they had like a map of where students lived, and we did some simple things where you could push a button and it would say all the students lived on this part of the town. And the parents were like, wow, that's so amazing. And they're trying to do simple databases and file stuff to manage. So I guess I just found it fun and interesting. And as a kid, when you're 10, there aren't many things you can do better than your parents. I mean, you perceive your parents as being all knowing and have understand the ways of the world. Well, here I was in school, teachers, the principal, and my parents were like, "Wow, you can do that? Well, I want to print out a newsletter for my nonprofit group. Could you do that?" Well, yeah, we got a printer. We can do a letterhead, and we'll do some mail merge, and I wrote some software to do this stuff. And it was exciting that I could write something and make it do things that no one else could do. So I think growing up as a 10 and then 12, 13-year-old, it was just amazingly empowering to be able to create something that no one else, at least against the adults at the time, could see possible.
So what was the first computer you owned? Explain it,
Well,
because some of the people that listen to this show are they're not going to understand anything you're talking about.
right. So when I started programming, we were using what we call 8-bit computers, and in the UK where I grew up, there was a tool called the Acorn. I'll come back to that because it's an interesting story. In the United States, where I think most of your listeners probably live, the comparable computer would have been the Commodore 64, which came out in the 81, 82. There was the TRS-80, the Tandy. That was around the same time. That's the era of computers I was working with, and most of the people I was doing this with at school, that was the generation we were using. The popular computers were the Acorn and the Sinclair in the UK. And there's a great movie with Martin Freeman from Love Actually and The Hobbit called Microman. It's on YouTube. It's a BBC video, and it's a great story where you see these two companies in the UK fighting it out, and it's just a great video to watch. And that was the era of computer I was writing. And I wrote the software. You can still get the stuff online today. So the great thing is the stuff never disappears. You can play my original video games and some of my programs online today using an emulator on a web browser. So it's pretty crazy. This stuff's still out there.
That's actually amazing. No, that's awesome. Well, and hearing you say even about the two companies kind of duking it out. I mean, I think back even like the Steve Jobs movie, where he's building it in his garage. And
Mm-hmm.
to me, that's the first computer I remember is like the basic Apple like console, because I
Yeah,
remember
the
my
Apple
cousin had
II.
one,
Right,
and
right.
putting the little floppy disk in there, and
Same era.
it's
It's the
like
same era of
it-
computers. It
it-
was floppy disks, or in fact, it was cassette drives. We couldn't afford floppy disks in Europe. We're too poor. We had cassette drives where you would play the actual music back, play the software back to an audio tape. And there's a great Black Mirror episode called Bandersnatch, which really shows this era. If you're a Black Mirror fan.
yeah, no, that's crazy. Well, and I'm going to mention I was actually just in the UK because I'm working with a company that's doing automation out there, collaborating. But
Mhm.
it's funny how the parallels in technology, it's like the early in people, then everybody's kind of fighting who has the best technology, and same thing happened with computers. But
Mhm.
look at the advancements it helped us make, because the competition is great, right? It's good to compete for who's, it advances the tech.
Absolutely.
So okay, so hearing you talk about what you're doing, you're almost like a freelance. You're kind of an entrepreneur at 10 or 12. You were doing stuff for the school for free. You could have probably been billing them for what you were
Well,
doing. You
I
were
was
like indentured.
I was trying to
So
sell software in the playground. So that was the other thing. I actually I wrote some computer games. I was selling it for like 50 cents in the playground. I was going to sell shares in my company. It was crazy stuff. I was like 12 or 13 then. Uh,
yeah.
that's funny.
So like explain a basic computer game you were trying to sell out on the playground. But this interests me.
Yes, the one I created, which is again still around, was based on the game of Risk, the board game. So what it was is it was a game of Risk on the computer screen where you could choose countries and you could play against another human player, two-player version, or you could play against the computer. And I wrote a very simple algorithm for the computer to basically do what most people do in Risk, which is concentrate your forces at a neighboring point where you've got an advantage, and then attack multiple times and use the roll of the dice and then disperse your forces afterwards. So I took a human strategy for Risk and made the computer attempt to follow it. And it was a basic game. It was sort of fun to write, but it was basically the maps on the world that would change color. And I called it Conquest because Risk is trademarked by whoever it is, Hasbro or Mattel.
So wait, you were smart enough back then to actually look at the trademark name and know you had to call your video. I mean, somebody had to help you with that. Come on,
I
you could have
think what
thought of
it
that
was,
yourself.
I got that one published in a magazine. So in the old days, they would put the discs on the front of the magazine, and I actually got this one published. And they told me that I had to change the name. I think I'd already realized that you can't call things like Coke and other things. I learned enough at least by that point. So I figured, I
Yeah.
probably shouldn't call it Risk.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, so this sets us a kind of a good baseline now for people to understand the early entrepreneur mind you had even back then. So okay, so now you start your company now that you have, which is Inflectra. Am I saying that
That's
properly?
correct. Absolutely.
So
Thanks.
so what motivated you in 2006 to start that company? Because I feel like then there's quite a gap. We're going to have to figure out what got you to that point, but we'll start with the motivation to start the
Right.
company.
And I think for a lot of people when they start companies, there's both push and pull motivations. I'm sure everyone listening to the podcast has often felt like they always wanted to do something and then something pushed them to do it. And so in my life, there were two factors that really drove me to doing this. One is I actually always wanted to start a company. That was sort of an intentional act. I went to university, did physics, sort of fill in the gap a little bit. And then I realized I didn't want to work in the lab. That wasn't something that fulfilled me. And I came to the United States and was working for an IT consulting firm. And if you've ever worked in a consulting firm or know of them, you work long hours, you do lots of travel. It's an relatively exhausting profession. You get lots of experience and skills, which is what I wanted. But by 2006, I had a 1-year-old, and my wife and I did, and we're still together.
Awesome.
Just make it sound like it's not past tense. And then my son at that point was like 6 or 7. And so the consulting lifestyle was not sustainable at that point in the travel with a young family. And I remember I was getting burnt out and I was getting ready to think about, quitting the company and going work somewhere else. And my wife had said, well, you always said that you didn't want to start a company because you'd be working too much when you were a family man. And she said, well, you are working too much anyway, so you might as well do it now. And you'll have more energy now than when you're older to start a company. So actually, I did that. So I started the company when my son was 6 or so. My daughter was 2 or so, thereabouts. And so it actually gave me a better quality of life than working for a consulting firm. And my wife has a full-time job and had a full-time job with the government, which made it more sustainable. And that's something in any person's life is trying to figure out when is a good time. There's never a good time. There's just different times. And in that, for us, it was a good time because she had a full-time job that was very stable. And I had kids were old enough that I could do some work. We could get them into preschool. it just worked out as a good time. But the startup was a lifestyle business, and that's one of the things I intentionally decided at the beginning was this was going to be a lifestyle business where it would be good hours. I could finish at 4 or 5, work from home, and balance being a family man. I was a scoutmaster for many years. I did a lot of extracurricular things that I would not have done if I'd been a consultant at my old company. So it enabled a lot of personal factors.
Yeah. So I want to expand on a point you made about there never being a right time. I think so many people, so nobody seems to notice your company in startup phase, right? When you're working really hard and you're struggling, you don't have the income coming in, your burn rate is higher than the actual receivables, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm spending more money than I'm making. Did I make a bad choice? Nobody even pays attention to your company then, right? Oh, they only pay
No.
attention when it's like successful, and then they think you just were instantly successful. So I think it's a great point that you make, that like you had this other income. You really, in theory, I mean, your wife, she was your partner in business at that point because she was providing the income for your family.
Right.
So you could start this, she was almost like her job was like your venture capital, your angel investing.
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
so no, I just think it's great. And I just wanted to kind of share like that. I totally can feel that. And I say also, I mean, myself, that's part of, there's like good and bad about being a business owner. And I got to see all my daughter's volleyball tournaments and travel with her. So there's definitely risk, but the rewards, I think always outweigh it if you're successful in business. So.
Yeah, there's definitely those early days where things are stressful, and it's always stressful. Now we're a bigger company, and there's more, I guess, daily stress. People needing things or questions, or clients are happy, unhappy. In business, there's always customers that are happy or unhappy, and you're dealing with stuff all the time. You don't get a true vacation when you're a business owner, as you probably know. You always
Yeah.
have your mind on it. On the other hand, you have more flexibility. So it's just trade-offs. And I think it's never too late. It's never too early. I know some people started businesses right out of college in the early 20s. Maybe they failed, but then they learn to do it again. Other people have a family and do it later. I mean, a great thing I remember reading about was Colonel Saunders from KFC. Again, the apocryphal story I read was that he'd started a restaurant, and then they built the highway, and the highway meant that no one went to his restaurant, and he started a chain of selling his recipe by car, and he ended up creating KFC, of course. So anyone has the opportunity to start again. So I feel like it's never too late. And if you fail once, you've got more options. And I think in the United States, particularly where there's a culture of this, it's easier. And coming from Europe, when you fail in business in Europe, it's a black mark against you, and it's much harder. So that's one of the reasons why I actually wanted to come here after college, because I recognized it was a better place just culturally to start a business. You're not judged emotionally by people.
Yeah, I mean, that's the nice thing about our capitalistic like society. It's like, I mean, if you can't do it here, you can't do it. I mean,
That's
that's
right.
just
That's right.
that's what it is. But yeah, talking about too how it's always on your mind, and I want to see if you agree with this. How old are your kids now? You told me how old they were when you started. It's a 2006.
I'm gonna get killed for this. My daughter is 19 and my son is 23. I got it right. Yes.
Okay, so my daughter is 22, and I have some stepsons now in the business and that work with me, 24, 23.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, one of the things that I feel like in my business, and I want to see if you feel the same way, is owning a business is almost like raising a child in a way. So when you brought up it's always on your mind. Okay, so like as we speak right now, my daughter went to the beach because I'm doing the podcast, and I, even as I'm doing the podcast, I just have to say this parallel. I'm thinking I hope she got to the beach. So she's in my mind, but I also am trusting she's going to get to the beach. And I'm sure, and that's how I feel with my business all the time. Like I'm always thinking like, are we going to be okay? Okay, how much was payroll this week and this and that? But I also trust the people I put in place. Do you have that same feeling about your business?
100%. I mean, it is. Sometimes we joke at home. It's like a second wife. My wife says, which is not always a compliment. But it's a family member. And my daughter actually worked like yours. Worked for the company for a while. When she was in high school, and it definitely feels like both the people in the company feel like family, because we're a family sort of firm, but also the company itself is almost a family member, and then family members have worked at the company, so there's a lot of overlap, and you definitely have that feeling of, is it going to be okay? You're always worrying, because even though you have good people in the company and they've trained well and you trust them, unexpected things happen. You just don't know how things will respond. And making payroll every month, people who've never owned a company don't realize the relief that comes. Even now, making that payroll, it's like check the box. Yay, we did it. And I think every big company, I'm sure deep down when they look at their quarterly earnings, if you're a publicly traded company, you still have to worry about this stuff. And as a small company, maybe the numbers are smaller, but it's just as traumatic. If you've only got a certain amount of runway, or if you have a bad few months, it can be the end of everything. And a few customers don't pay you. For us, we have quite diversified income. We have people with credit cards. We have people paying larger amounts on like net 30, net 60 for those who are in business. You understand that means you've got a diversity of payment maturities. But if you have lots and lots of big companies all paying you after 90 days, you might be massively profitable, but you can't cover your payroll because you haven't got enough cash. I mean, it's very stressful all the time in so many different dimensions.
Yes, no, totally. Well, I mean, we definitely, that could be a whole hour long conversation right there, but I don't want to stay on it too long because I want you to actually be able to explain your company. But yes, totally. I think it's why, I mean, I think entrepreneurs, I mean, what do we probably make up 1 or 2% of the world, right? And you have to be able to handle those types of stressors and just be able to kind of cope with them. So, I mean, I'm very proud to be in that percentage, as I'm sure you are,
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
So explain your company then. I always like to ask what even gets the name, right? So like as I wear on my shirt here, Automated Outdoor Solutions, there's a reason for that name. So explain, let's start with the name. And then, and for people, some people are listening in their car. So it's like, I like that I actually see that you have your a picture right behind you right now, lowercase IN, and then Inflectra is underlined. So anyways, that's like the brand image. That's what it is. So explain that process.
Absolutely. And the original, and it's hard to see on the painting, but there's also 3 little inflection points. So for those who are mathematically, and the word math turns people off, so don't get turned off if you don't like math. In mathematics, you have what's called an inflection point, which is a curve where the slope changes, and the logo has 3 of those. So the whole name came from the idea of an inflection point, which is in any industry. You look at the computer industry, look what Apple did, and my mind is going blank on many other industries. There've been sea changes where things are streaming with what Netflix has done. The industry changes irrevocably, and you don't know until you look back, like, oh my goodness, a year ago they did this thing which no one appreciated, but now it's a massive change and it's completely disrupted the industry. That point of change is where the whole industry is going through what's called an inflection point. I felt like, well, if I want to start a company, we want to be, helping people achieve good. We want to change the industry we're in. Making money is important, but what drives any entrepreneur, I'm sure you're the same, it's not just making money, because there's many ways to make money. It's about building a new product or a new service or doing something that's just different. And an inflection point symbolized that to me. And Inflectra, therefore, was a way to find a name that encompassed that. And another thing, which I think I've mentioned on a blog I wrote, was that make the name memorable. So what I did is I wrote 5 versions of the inflection, like Inflectico, Inflectra, about 6, 7 different versions. And when my son was, again, 5 or 6, I had him read them all out to him in the nighttime. And in the morning, I asked him which one he remembered. And that's the one he remembered. And I figured if he can remember it as a 5 or 6-year-old, potential customers might remember it as well.
Fantastic. No, that's a great explanation. So if like, what type of companies are you trying to work with then? I mean, what types of companies are you helping?
Right. We typically work with mid to large companies that are building software applications that are complex and mission critical, and they can't fail. So we're not doing the work for them, but we provide them tools, software tools, to help them design their software, define how it works, how they develop it, test it, what's the quality, how they manage risk, and how they release it. So it's basically, in the industry terminology, it's called like DevOps or development operations, but it's basically tools to help programmers, testers, business owners, managers, design software, develop it, release it, and do it in a way that reduces the risk of things going wrong. So, for example, if you're a company that's going to build like an online banking tool, or you're a biotech startup or a fintech startup, or a medium to large company that's doing large amounts of IT, we've got some customers that are doing like data visualization for pharmaceuticals. These are complex software apps. Well, it's all very well building this app. How do you know it's going to work? How do you make sure when you go to the FDA, for example, to get this tool approved, because it does require approval, or if it's a fintech bank, how are you going to make sure that the OCC is going to approve it? You need to make sure that not only does the software work, but it actually meets the purpose it was built for. And so our software helps you do all of that management and all of that, what we call compliance, and all of that reporting, so that when you go live, you can be confident it's not going to give your customers undue risk. And software, the one thing I say, software is everywhere. I mean, we saw it in the pandemic. Software is now schools, so using Zoom and using online classrooms. And if things go wrong, if grades get misapplied, people's entire lives can be wrecked. Who's testing this stuff? So a great story from the UK, well, not a great story, a story from the UK, it's quite tragic, is about a software system, if you go online, called Horizon, where post office managers built, were given software that would manage their post offices. These are small entrepreneurs who were going to run their own post office. It was going to be their lifetime's dream. Well, there was a bug in the software where it miscalculated all the financials, and they were accused of fraud, and they went to jail. Many committed suicide. This is a completely real story. Go on BBC, check it. And the software was never fully tested. Well, it's that kind of system that we try and prevent with our software. And we do quite a lot of work with state governments in the US and local governments in the UK and around the world, as well as big companies that make these tools. And so we believe that using the right kind of software, as well as obviously having a qualified team and knowing what you're doing, but helps customers and users reduce the risk of this kind of terrible thing happening.
I gotta ask, because I can't get it out of my mind right now. So these people that software had a bug,
Yeah.
it sounds like it was multiple people. They couldn't trace it back and say, yeah, it was a software bug. None of these people did anything maliciously and let them off. Like,
no, they tried. They went to like legal aid. They got lawyers involved. I think it took, I don't remember the dates, but I think it took 5 to 10 years for this finally to get the press attention, and people were given pardons. But several people were so distraught, they tried to pay out of their own savings. Several went bankrupt. Several did commit suicide. It was a terrible scandal. These were basically hardworking, mom and pop companies. They were small, independent post offices in the UK, where you have your own business. You would do post office and stamps and sell newspapers and all that stuff. And this was the software you had to use to do the payroll, the tracking of the inventory. And there was a bug. There were several bugs in it, and the company had been warned. I don't want to get myself up into legal jeopardy. So it's on the BBC. It's completely public story, and software has this problem consistently. There are many other situations like unemployment insurance in the US during the pandemic, where fraudulent claims were made. There's so much software that's released that's just not well tested, and we trust it for these mission critical things that people's livelihoods or lives use, and yet we don't test it very well.
so yeah, well, that's startling, thinking about how much, even as I have to fly out of here Saturday, hopefully they test that software.
The FAA had that meltdown, what was it, 3 weeks ago?
And they
2
did
weeks
have
ago?
that meltdown. It was like, yeah, I remember that. I'm glad I was not flying that week. Yep. Yep. And they said that's like a 30-year-old system that's needed to get updated for decades, that nobody's done anything. That's the story anyways.
Right, it's true. And the banks are still using those same COBOL systems. So is a lot of the airline reservation systems. Do you know why they don't change them? It's not because they can't hire programmers to develop them. It's because the time to test it would take so long, and because they work. But they work only as well as they were designed back in the day. So you're kind of stuck with the system that's very brittle, fragile, but the cost to change it is too high. The cost to keep it is getting higher. What do you do?
See, but now, okay, let's talk about that for a second, because like even my own company, okay, so like my not AOS, but my landscape and snow removal company, and we do quite a bit of revenue, and we're going to change to a different provider. I'm going to leave their name nameless, but let's just imagine. But because I, as an entrepreneur, want to make sure that their system that can automatically does bill properly, we're just going to run their system for several months in parallel to our other system and check for any anomalies. Right. So even hearing what you're saying, okay, it's going to take a long time to test or whatever, but if they know if it's a problem, start running in parallel, right? I mean, that's all they would really have to do.
Right, and then what? So again, we probably would be more useful at a bigger scale. You certainly could use our software, but I think it's probably a little overkill. But when you want to track all those results, somewhere you've got to track what matches, what doesn't match. The tools that we have would both help you do that testing. It would also help the company that maybe wrote the software, or if it's an off-the-shelf software that did the building of it, they could have used our tools to help make sure that before they even gave it to you, they had done at least a good job of testing it in a general sense. And then when you configure it for your business, you're changing it subtly. You would want to then retest it in your environment. And that's often the case with software. It's tested by the manufacturer for one use. It gets deployed into an organization, and it has to be retested once it's been set up and configured. And people often don't do that, or don't do it well.
So in the industry you work in, what how many competitors do you compete with? And then how do you differentiate yourself from those competitors?
That's a great question. I mean, we compete with on order of magnitude, probably about, depending on the exact segment, about 50 or so companies that compete strongly with us. Some of them are big like Microsoft, and then there's some much more specialized companies that are probably more the same scale as us. And that's probably true for a lot of software companies, because the big guys, they do so many things. You sort of compete with them just by being in the industry. And the differentiators for us have really been around the quality and risk management side. We realized early on that a lot of tools help you plan software and develop it. There's not as much on the testing side, or if there is testing software, it's not well connected to the people who wrote the software or designed it and defined it. And then the risk management, being able to track future risks, has been a huge differentiator. Obviously there's things like price and some of the ways we do licensing that's a bit different to other people, which are other differentiators. And I could go into more of that, but again, for the audience, it's important to have, I think, what we would call feature differentiators and non-feature differentiators, because what we find is when you're doing business, people will come to you because you have a certain feature like risk management that no one else has, but also we have a licensing model that's more flexible, so they can have a team in India, a team in the US, or a team in South America working in different time zones and use the same licenses, which makes it economically more interesting. So we've got a mixture of these effectively feature and non-feature differentiators, and I think that's helped us and the market have a much stronger differentiation than if we just simply said, we have these features that we have, but otherwise we're the same. Or you can just be, we're like them, but cheaper, which is a price differentiation, or you could have it. So having a combination of these things is really important, because we find in the industry that most people don't choose solely on price, but price is a factor. And then people choose on certain features they want, but they also want usability, integrations, onboarding. There's a lot of sort of subtle things you have to get right to make the software adoptable and adopted by people easily. And it's hard, and the software in our world is quite a hard process to get that right, because you're dealing with technical users, but they're also very time pressed. So even though they're technical, they don't always have time to read everything. So how do you explain a complex thing simply? And we find it's often through stories and examples, like we just did on this podcast. Giving the story about what happened in the UK with the post offices is a much easier way for me to explain than if I just simply said, oh, risk management, testing. It's kind of, these are amorphous topics. So people like stories and storytelling.
Well, they do. And this is why I have a podcast, because that is life, right? I mean, you're passing down knowledge generation to generation, typically in a story. And I believe people learn better in this type of setup anyways. Most people, I mean, you went to school for physics, so you probably learn from a textbook or whatever, but myself personally, this is how I learn, so I'm always kind of interested, because like even sometimes when I tell people in my world of outdoor automation, that it's figured to be a 90 to $100 billion like potential, their brains are just blown. So in what you do, I mean, you have to know. If you don't, you can say no or you don't, but like what type of like capital potential
What's
software
the
have?
TAM, the total addressable market? Based on the size of our competitors and their market share and their revenue, I mean, looking at the bigger ones, that would probably define it's probably 100 billion, 50 to 100 billion. It could be as big as that worldwide, I would say, based on the competitors that we have. It's certainly in that scale. It's certainly between 10 and 100 billion. I don't know exactly where it would land in that range.
Yeah, I mean, so it's crazy. I mean, I only brought that up because this is the thing. So you brought up an inflection point, and just so like it really hit to me, because that's kind of what I'm dealing with right now. So to tell you a little about myself, Adam, is so I actually went to high school, football player, that's what I was focused on. Actually, I wanted to be a meteorologist. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to be a meteorologist. That didn't work out. Went to school for small surgery and analysis, became a union electrician. I hated it. So kind of going back to like what you didn't like, I didn't like it. And the reason I didn't was I couldn't be me. I couldn't talk to people. I felt like I couldn't personally help anybody. I just had to show up and do a job. I didn't enjoy it. So I started a snow removal company, and then that company grew quickly because we focused on service. Okay, great service. So, there's a saying, yeah, and I'm going to go off what you said, price, service, quality, pick two, because you can't have all three. So I never really wanted to be the guy that just sold on price. I was going to sell on service and quality. And that played well for us. And then we got into landscaping. Now, here's my inflection point, as you said earlier. I realized that in my line of work, I couldn't pay people a true wage in the landscape season so they could have a family and have like what you and I have, where you have some financial security, because the industry won't allow people to spend enough money to mow grass. Right.
Right.
Like the market says no more than $40 an acre. So I got into outdoor automation. So just so you know, my inflection point was to say, okay, I have to change the way the industry thinks of mowing grass, And so anyway, so that was it. But like I said, same thing, technology, massive potential in business, because that's the way the world runs now.
Right, and I think we had an inflection point of our own, which is when I started the company back in those early days of lifestyle, we were very much a price-centered company, because as a small company, the first thing you can do is, especially as a programmer, I can code it myself. I can basically keep the price low by doing all the coding. I can do online sales, minimize human touch, make it very efficient. And then, of course, other companies start to who are bigger than you compete with that, and suddenly you're now in a commoditized market. So, that's where having like mentors and people who can help you look at your business critically from the outside are very helpful. And that's where we decided to get more into certain specialties or niches, to basically find where we could be the best at things, not just simply the cheapest. And I think that was a big inflection point, making that transition. And one book I've started reading, which has been very interesting recently to try and improve things even further, you may know it, Blue Ocean Strategy. It's about finding a new market, defining your market, not letting the market define you. And that's something I've just about halfway through right now. It's been very helpful. And we're going to use it to redefine some of our messaging and some of our products and development strategy as a company.
So I'm not familiar with that, and I'm gonna have to look that up, because it would probably really relate to everything I'm doing right now.
Especially what you said, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for that recommendation. So you had said you wanted to you started your company based on having the time to be with your family, right?
Right.
Like, so has that come to fruition? Like, how have you managed that? Has there been times you had to figure out a way to not let that run away on you, or what?
That's a great question, and it's been a transition. So in about 2016 or so, and maybe even 2015, we were at a point where the company was fine, we were making decent money. We're a small company, we're growing at a moderate rate, and I have a good balanced life. But I wanted to grow the company. I felt like we've got an untapped potential in the market after we did this analysis and what I mentioned earlier. And I realized we want to grow faster. So around that time, I had some people to do the sales and marketing, help me not just do it myself. We're now going to have a team, and that obviously reduces the profitability, but you get to grow the company faster. And it was around that time that my kids got older, and I was a scoutmaster, and then I did my 2 or 3 years of doing that. It was great fun. We went to scout camps and outdoor stuff and camping and hiking, and it was a lot of fun. And then my son went off to college, and then my daughter's busy with doing stuff, and now they've both gone. She's in college and he's got a job and working and living separately. So now I'm at the point where I'm an empty nester. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, knowing that was coming, I intentionally said, I'm going to spend more time in the company. I'm actually going to have a less well-balanced life for me. And I want to make this company grow. I started traveling a lot more, doing more of the things I had stopped doing when I was back in 2006, when the kids were young. So I've kind of gone full circle to being more of that consultant. I did 12 international, US and domestic and international trips combined last year. I'll be doing more this year. And I'm definitely not around as much, but my wife can come with me on these trips now, because guess what? There's no kids at home. So it's sort of life. You find the different phases in life, and I've been able to align the company's growth and my time investment with the right phase for me. And that was very lucky and very helpful.
So, if you don't mind me asking, what did your kids end up going to school for, and what do they do now?
Oh, so my son went to aerospace engineering. So he kept the physics side. He's now an aerospace engineer working for Northrop Grumman in the Washington, D.C. area where I live. My daughter's a freshman at USC in California, doing technology business of the business of innovation. So she's in the same kind of business I am in.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure you're very proud of both of them then.
So thanks.
Yeah, that's great. So, when I was doing my research, and maybe you can help me with this a little bit. So you spent some time in with Sapient, right? Government
that was the consulting
services.
firm. Yeah, that was the consulting firm. That's correct. Yes.
Okay, gotcha. So we kind of covered that. So we were already there. So your physics, I just want to know. So like what you studied, went to Oxford for physics. So do you use any of that in what you do, or is it kind of like, yeah, I've got a degree in physics, but I'm a coder?
Well, a bit like what you said about engineering, like the electrical stuff. I did it as a degree and as a major, and then I realized I didn't like it much. I don't want to be in a lab, stuck away, beavering away. I'm a people person like yourself. I enjoy meeting people, talking to people. I always loved the business from the age of 10, doing the the coding and try to sell the software in the playground. So I realized it really wasn't for me. So I haven't really used it much. I did use it when I met my wife. We were dating, and you always think, well, I read these great novels, it'll be a great thing for a date. And actually, so we go to an Irish pub in Boston, and there was this thing on the wall about lasers. I'm like, well, let me tell you about lasers. And she found it really exciting that I would tell her how lasers worked. I think that was part of our, I don't know, attraction. So the only thing I've ever used physics for is getting a date, which is not what people normally say.
Well, so now I'm interested. I mean, if you talking about lasers got you a date, I mean, why don't you tell me? I mean, I look at a laser and just say it's a laser. So why don't you go into a little bit of that? I want to hear it.
Right. So okay, it's been a while. So but lasers basically are they're a form of light where if most light is diffuse, meaning that if you shine a flashlight, and you know this, when you shine a flashlight after a certain amount of distance, it just completely disappears. Whereas if you get a laser, you can basically almost point a point on the moon. They say, I don't know if it's truly that strong, but it's focused and it will not dissipate. The reason why that happens is light's made up of these particles, and they're all like moving around in different angles. They're all kind of like higgledy-piggledy, like caterpillars or worms in a bait bucket. But with a laser, imagine all the light particles are pointing in the same way. They're all aligned like a magnet with iron filings, and so they all go the same way, so they don't knock into each other, so they don't dissipate. And to do that, you have to create what's called a population inversion, where you have in the atom, you basically have to change the way the atoms were laid out, so that all the light photons, all the light molecule particles, they're all aligned inside the atom, so they all come out at the same time. And it's called stimulated emission. So that's where laser gets its name. It's the light amplification for the stimulated emission of radiation. And you have to get these different materials that you put together. They create this light, these atoms are arranged in a non-standard way, such that all the light particles come out at the exact same time in the same direction, creating this very focused beam that doesn't dissipate like a regular light. That's a very badly described summary version of a laser.
It got you your wife, and I think it was great, So yeah, so that's good. Little did you know, being able to explain a laser would end up getting you married with 2 kids, right?
Yeah, that's very true. In Boston.
Awesome. So when I was looking, it says you're very passionate about economic empowerment with bridging technology. So do you want to maybe I'm going to give you a platform to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. And I think this is a really important thing that, and we're not the only ones doing it. There are plenty of stories of other companies, but technology is a really great, I think, enabler for people around the world. And why is that? Well, the reason is that you need people to be smart. So if you set up a business in a developing country, or maybe a city where there's less economic growth, you can build a mine, and you as the owner make lots of money mining all the resources, and all the workers get paid very little. But like you said, with the issue with lawn mowing and landscaping, and that's why you went into the automation. Well, if you set up a software company, the only way you can develop software is to have skilled workers who write the software, although AI might change that. But at least as it is today, you need skilled workers. So if you go to a place where there's, say, high unemployment, and you can teach them programming, well, guess what? You're creating a large pool of intelligent, educated workers who will make good money. Well, you're now raising the whole life of that community. So that's why I find that technology in particular, and if you look at the developing world, where you put an oil rig, you find oil and gas, the rulers get very wealthy, but the workers and the country does not. You build a software development industry like in India, or what we're seeing in Vietnam or Africa right now, the countries where the software development and the testing and services has become the dominant industry, the workers have retained a lot more of the income, and there's much less inequality, and the people can aspire to a better life. And this was brought home to me very practically by a friend of mine, Jorge, who works at the company now, but at the time he was a customer. He actually got our software into several of the shanty towns in Argentina, Buenos Aires, and they have a program there, which is on the website, which is his doing. I was just a supporter of it, where they actually teach a lot of the people who will have like blue-collar jobs to become programmers at a night school, and they have then got jobs in the consulting industries like Deloitte or Accenture in Argentina and other countries, and they have now got professional lives, and they've lifted them out of poverty. And it's just an amazing story that we've done there. And another friend of mine who's based in South Carolina, he's doing the same thing right now in Nigeria. He's actually built a residential academy called the Tesla Academy, where they're training young people to become software engineers or software testers, and he's going to then have them do work for US, European companies. And he's built this whole industry, this whole like private entrepreneurial, not the government, building this institute, which is going to help them achieve a new quality of life for them and their families.
That's amazing. And see, that's one of the things, like I said, that's important to me with this industry, because people often think that I'm going to take people's jobs away, and I'm constantly just saying, no, I mean, it's just going to elevate what they do. And it's story, I think you'll appreciate it, when both of my stepsons were mowing grass for me. My company, by the way, I pay people that mow grass for me pretty well, full benefit. So it's not like they're in poverty. They think they are, but they're really not. But
Sorry,
but
I didn't mean to imply that. I just meant that
no,
yeah.
no. But what I know, but what I was actually specifying. But the thing was also, you take the monetary side away, the rewarding part, that's what I want to hit on. So when I took Ray and Kevin and put them into the automation part of my business, when people would ask them, hey, what do you do with Joe? They used to be, oh yeah, I mow grass for him. I mean, you could tell even by all their body language, like, yeah, I mow grass. And then now when you ask them, they're like, I'm his echo specialist, or I'm his Husqvarna specialist. And what happens is, you can tell they're very proud of what they're doing, and proud workers yield great outcomes. When people are happy, and they have pride in what they're doing, the yield is so much higher in what they'll do in a day or a year.
And they've learned skills too. I mean, they've learned skills of using technology in that particular industry, and they may then come up with an idea that you haven't thought of, as something where, well, if I took that, I don't know your industry very well, so, but there's this automation we're using for this kind of environment. What if we did this and this? Could that be something new? Well, then they're going to come up with new ideas and entirely new ways of doing things that no one's thought of, which, if you're just doing a simple, like the previous mowing work, they're not going to get that. So you're giving them opportunities for things just beyond what they're doing even today.
Well, and not only that, it's attracting people into the industry. I mean, who wants to work in an industry where somebody doesn't even like to really say out loud what they do?
Right.
When somebody's like, I'm a coder, or I do this, or I do that, it's like, yeah, I should do that myself, which is great for the industry, because an industry without people and talent is a dead industry. So now I want to, this is a total side thing, but you brought up AI one day, possibly, and it being able to do the coding, and I'll tell you, so many people, like, they have these side conversations of Skynet, and when we let the computers do too much. So what do you think? I mean, are there going to be checks and balances to AI doing coding? Like, how would that even work? And does that concern a guy like you, Adam?
Yes, I am concerned about it, because unfortunately humans are lazy, and we automate things and we don't always understand the implications of what we automate. So there already are tools out there. In fact, my daughter at USC was saying that someone she knows was just tearing it out to see if it could code, and the computer ChatGPT, the current flavor du jour, can create some basic code, and it works, and it can debug your code that you've written. And now GitHub, a Microsoft product that's very, very good, that can do some code debugging and checking for you. So the computers can already check the code that we write. The computers are now writing code that they themselves, that we check. Well, so you could have computers checking code that other computers have written. At some point, if we're not careful, and we're not there yet, we could have a situation already where computers are designing systems we don't understand. There's already some truth to this, because even the AI systems that we rely on, like a Google Maps and things, well, we've moved away from the idea that, I write software that I wrote the steps 1 through 10. Instead, we've told the computer, here's this data set, here are these rules, put it together and see what you come up with. Some of the systems we have today, even now, we don't fully understand how they work. We know they work, and we know that if we give them this data set, we know they work okay, maybe amazingly even. But do we know what happens if it's given a data set it hasn't seen before? Will it be safe? We don't know. What else has it found that we didn't even know it's found? So we're not at Skynet, but we're definitely farther along than I think 3 years ago I would have said we would have been. It's amazing the progress we've made. There are some tools for those of you who are out there, and this is interesting. What's it called? I think it's called Write Sonic, which we just started trying out at the company. It can write blogs and articles for you in tweets, and it's good. And it can rewrite articles for you. So if we have a colleague who writes articles in a certain tone that's good for a white paper or a blog, but we want to change the style of that article to be maybe more creative or more engaging for a different medium. In the past, we'd ask him to rewrite his article a second time. But now this tool could take that article, which is written, say, for a professional publication, and now we want to put it into a much more like LinkedIn post where it's much more engaging and lighthearted. It can rewrite it in that tone for you, and it will look natural.
But then how can someone actually take credit for that? I mean, it's not
Uh,
even your intellectual property. I mean, it's not your
no,
thought.
right. And we don't know where it's getting this text from. It's not coming from, it's coming from maybe multiple hundreds of thousands of websites, all of whom are being scraped. Well, there's a lawsuit right now, a trademark lawsuit going right now about that on the graphic side around art. Well, that's a very good point. If it's scraped 1% from each of the major newspapers and publications, but not that you could detect, put it together into a new article. That's what we as humans do. So we do that. When I write an article that's a human, I read other sources, I read some of it, and I'll rephrase things, especially some of the boilerplate. I'm going to take 5 or 6 sources and rephrase it to be the introduction. Then I'll add my own stuff. Well, if you get a computer to do that boilerplate, and it did the exact same thing, is that copyright infringement? Is it fair use? The lawyers on the call can decide. I don't know.
Well, and I mean, I haven't had to write a paper in a long time, but I mean, we just have to cite our source and show where it came from. So, I mean, they're not citing sources either then, right?
No, this tool doesn't. But you can't find the source because it came from so many sources that it's not a single source.
Yeah, see, that's kind of blowing my mind. I've got to tell you.
Have you played with it? Have you played with this
No,
tool?
I haven't. So I have to tell you, Adam, I'm right now I'm at a stage in my life where I am so a lot of people think I'm not focused because I have so many businesses because I have several businesses.
Right.
But I'm actually hyper focused because I kind of have like a hub spoke model. So some of this stuff, like when you bring up chat GDP, right? That's what it's called.
GPT, yeah.
GPT.
Yeah.
I just met with a guy the other day that came to visit me from Boston, and he was like, "You got to pull this up," and he couldn't even get on it. Like he kept on trying to,
Yeah, no, it's
to
busy,
get in,
it's busy, yeah.
and it was so busy you couldn't even get on. And he's like, "You got to do it. Try to get on at like 11 o'clock. Maybe there'll be nobody on it." But I was just like, "Yeah, okay," because for me right now am focused. But now you've got me intrigued. Like I actually have to make time to go on.
Oh, so my wife was the same because she's an economist, and she was like, "Oh, whatever." So if you're okay talking about this for a minute, so what I did is
let's talk about it. Yep.
I asked it a factual question. What is the GDP of something? Or I asked it a very basic factual question, and it wrote an answer that looked like Wikipedia. And my wife said, "Oh, okay, it's just grabbing Wikipedia. Why is everyone going crazy about it?" I said, "Okay, let me ask it to create a fictional story." So I asked it to create a story based on time travel, penguins, chocolate bars. That's how I said. And it wrote me a 4-paragraph story that I read and go, "This is pretty good." And it understood what time travel was. It knew what a chocolate bar was. It knew what a penguin was, where a penguin lived. And it wrote a narrative about a penguin being curious about a chocolate bar, going into a time machine. And I was blown away. Fiction. It wrote fiction.
Yeah, we're screwed.
I mean,
I mean, when I hear this, it's like I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of my mind is blown with that because I mean I know there's that I forget what her name is, but there's like the fake like the robot human that asked if she could have a baby because then she could be more human.
oh wow,
And
yeah,
then
yeah,
somebody have you seen any of this? And then you should look this up. And then I
okay.
forget what the robot's name is, but then somebody asked her like what she thinks about humans, and she ends up basically saying like, yeah, human beings are destroying the earth, which means human beings need to be destroyed.
Which is
And it's
logical,
like,
which is a logical, well, and she's basing that information on what she's reading on stuff that we've written.
correct. So then it's like, so you see that, and then I'm like, pull the plug, I mean, this looks like an episode of iRobot, so, or I mean, the movie iRobot,
Right,
so.
right. Oh yeah, which is great. And I forget the other one. Oh, the Ex Machina, the one about the person who falls in love with the robot, which is a great movie too.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So, well, anyway, well, I'm gonna have to check that out. So you think we're okay for now, but stay tuned is what you're
I would
saying.
say that's the case, and I think humans write computer stuff. Humans are flawed, well, make mistakes. Therefore, computers make mistakes. So there's already risks without AI, and that if you look at some of the things like the FAA we mentioned earlier on about things not working, AI is potentially could help us because it will find the mistakes that we make, but we need to make sure that there are checks and balances, or there's a plug, whatever the metaphor is, some way of us at least having control over this, because it's growing faster than we expected, and it certainly could decide, as you said, that we are a threat to the world, which maybe we are, maybe we're not. That's a political thing. We keep out of this. But certainly it could use, by looking at the data, if it reads the news and things that we write, it could certainly do things that we don't intend it to do because it's learning from things it's reading about us. It doesn't necessarily know, is this newspaper is it like imagine it read The Onion. It
Oh
learned
my
everything from the
gosh.
onion, and suddenly it's going to have a completely warped view of the world, and that's an
Yeah,
equally valid view of the world that they might think.
yeah. Well, I was going to say it just needs to stay off certain social media sites, and then we're going to be okay, you know. So,
Right, right,
so all right. So something I want to get to, so we don't run out of time. So,
right.
I see you also so you have an international presence. You kind of started to hit on it a little bit.
Hmm.
So you said you're doing this through licensing. Is that how you do that,
Okay,
or?
great question. So we've always had an international business from day one because we had an online presence, an online website, and we sold software that wasn't physical. So if you're going to start a business, if you have to ship physical goods, that limits where you can go. So this is software you just sign up for. So always it was international because inevitably anyone could buy it anywhere that that you can take a credit card or wire money or something. So that was always international, but even though it was international from a customer standpoint, it wasn't international from employees or where people in the company were. But then what happens is, so you get customers, and they want to log a support ticket or need help at 2 a.m. my time. And also, so in the end, we end up having to hire people in other countries to actually do support in the evening of the US where I live. And so we were sort of dragged into being international a little bit at the beginning. And then the second thing we found is we do a lot of our sales direct, and then another group of our sales is done through partners, and maybe the same in your industry, where you're recommended by a company that does services, or is a professional company that writes software. Well, they need tools when they write software or test software, so they recommend us, and they're in different countries. So then we start working with them, and then we need someone in another country to work with them on an ongoing basis. So we have a partner manager now in Europe who handles all of our European partners and helps coordinate business that they want to bring to us. And also, if we have a customer that needs to use our product but needs help with using it, we have partners who can do training. So we built up what we would call in our industry channel partnerships, and that's where you have companies in different industries that are related to yours, where they basically can help sell and train and use the business and get extra value from it. And so we have an international employees now, and we actually have full coverage. So we have someone in France who covers poor guy, all of Europe. We need to grow the presence to give them more help. We have some support people in Europe too. So we have pre-sales and support in Europe, about 3 or 4 people there. We have in South America a couple doing support and sales, and they cover all of Latin America for us. Again, speak Spanish and Portuguese, which you need. And then in Australia, we've got someone who does pre-sales and some support there, and that's mostly Australia, New Zealand, a little bit of Asia Pac. And then someone who handles India. So we've got these different people around the world. So we've always had an international business. One of the challenges for anyone who's ever done that is employment law. It's a real pain. It's bad enough in the US with all the states and all the withholdings, and some tools that if you've got people on this call who are business owners, I love Gusto as a payroll platform. Have a payroll platform. Don't do it yourself like I used to do. That was a big mistake, trying to do it all manually. Get an online platform. There's so many good ones now. That's just one of them. And then for the international employees, there's a great thing which has come about, which is relatively new, I think, called an employer of record or professional employer organization. The PEO or EOR, they are effectively local companies, and they have a worldwide platform. So if I want to hire someone in Canada or France, which I do have people there, I can hire through this platform, and they handle the pensions, all the taxes, and everything. And you just have to have a contract with them, and that way your employer gets all their benefits, and you're not breaking any laws in Europe that you would not know about. And you as a company don't have to worry about all that stuff. So it lets a small company effectively be able to grow internationally from having people on the ground there, as well as the international sales, obviously. And that's been an amazing benefit for us.
Yeah, no, it's almost like I mean, as I'm hearing that, it's almost like having a temp agency where they just give you a flat fee and then they deal with everything. But
Right.
it's like an international temp agency
Correct.
almost.
And these people feel like they're your employees. So it's for permanent rather than temp. But it's an equivalent of that. You don't have to have a physical presence in France and deal with the French labor law. They have a French company that's doing all of that for a bunch of American companies, for example. So it lets small companies, effectively have a global HR platform.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, and I ask that because like right now, like I actually just gotten to that stage where, like I said, I'm working with that company AMS, but I mean,
Yeah.
I'm distributing his product, bringing it back to the States. And, I've been kind of going back and forth. Do I want to stay corporate model? Do I want to start to license? And so that's kind of why I asked, because I was
Yeah,
thinking, well,
we do
maybe you get
license.
some insight,
Yeah, we
you
do.
know?
We have resellers where they get a reseller fee, and they can bundle it with their services. We've done some white labels where someone would take our product and then some of our products, and they would add their own special sauce to it and rename it. So there's some things we've done with licensing as well. But most of the time it's traditional reselling, and then services they build around it.
So what country besides, I'm assuming the United States is your largest market? What's your
Yeah.
second largest market then, country-wise?
Second, by revenue, it's currently, I think it's the UK, and the third one is either Germany or Switzerland. It depends year over year.
Awesome. Yeah, congratulations on that. I mean, that's, that's a big deal to be an international business, So,
Yeah, 50% of our revenue is US, so the other 50% is the rest of the world. So we're only half of, I think maybe 55. So it's just over half is US. So we have a large amount, and doing business overseas is always interesting because the rules are different, the terminology is different. I mean, the banking systems are different. I mean, there's all this crazy nonsense, taxes, laws, insurance. I mean, there's a lot of nonsense you have to deal with in international business. We're dealing with virtual goods, which is all software. But if you're dealing with physical goods, I mean, I can't even imagine all the shipping and the custom stuff you have to deal with. I mean, that just sounds terrible.
what do you see? I mean, do you see any changes coming in the next year or two? I mean, I guess we already started to hit on it with AI programming, but what are you trying to adapt and evolve to keep your business sound?
Oh,
And
sure.
solid?
Changes in our industry and our business. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, AI is one of the things that's changing how people do software testing for sure. That's a big, macro change. The other thing we've seen is some consolidation so on the product side where we're selling, a lot of companies are looking for tools to do more. So in the same, instead of having 3 or 4 different products to do different things, they want to have a platform that's doing more and more integrated features that you can use one platform as your hub and then feed other things into it. The other thing that's been a big interesting change is security and privacy. So 3 years ago, everything's going to the cloud. Everyone's going to, everything, if you were building a payroll system for your business, maybe 5 years ago, you'd have installed it on a laptop computer maybe and had it work in your office. And 2 or 3 years ago, it's going to be a cloud hosted thing that you have a URL. And that's still true for a lot of companies, but we're seeing a move in the other direction. Big companies, particularly in sectors like finance and banking and insurance, they're looking to have some stuff on private cloud because they recognize that they want to keep more control over the data, the privacy. And we're seeing things obviously in Europe, which we deal a lot with GDPR and European companies around privacy. So I would say the sensitivity around data breaches and privacy and security, that's just becoming more and more of a concern. And I think like when we do business with a vendor now, whereas in the past, if someone on my team said, hey, I want to get this new tool to do something, I don't know, track customers and stuff, we would just say, okay, let's look at it. Is it good? Fine. Now our security person will actually look at that tool that we're going to use. Do they have these certifications? Where is the data hosted? I hate to say it. Is it in a NATO country? Is it in a EU country? Because of all the issues right now going on in around the world, who owns the data? Where is it going to go through certain other countries? We don't want the data going. I mean, I think the level of introspection and checking that people are doing means it's a more difficult industry. People will be much more careful. So that plays to our strengths from a feature standpoint, but it also means that our sales length of sales is getting longer. So whereas if someone liked the software, maybe they'll buy it after they liked it, maybe 30 days, we'd have it under contract and up and running. Their risk and legal departments, especially because we deal with large and medium-sized companies, it can be 90 days. So I think there's a lot more scrutiny in the software industry around a lot of these legal, regulatory, privacy stuff. And that's only going to get more and more intense as we see more of these data breaches that you see every day and more, and things like the FAA going wrong. So I think that's one of the big other second trends. So AI, security, privacy, I think consolidation. And I think then the last thing is that software is just continuing to eat at other industries. Like, if someone had said I was going to be a taxi driver 5 years ago, and I've got this medallion in New York, it's worth X money, who'd have thought that 2 or 3 years later that the online platforms would make that medallion literally worthless? Could other industries go the same way? I don't know.
Yeah. So so we're getting close here on our time. So I'm kind of skimming through my questions
No
here real
problem.
fast to make sure there's ones that I actually make sure. So you say you're spending more time on your business and growing your business. So what is, do you have any like revenue goals? I mean, what's a milestone or what are you trying to achieve right now with the business?
Good question. So we're trying to grow at about 30% year over year. That's ideally a little bit more than that, but that's sort of the goal to do that. The other thing we're trying to do is grow our revenue mix so that instead of it being a lot of it's direct, a lot of it's still direct sale, which we built this new partner program, and we want our partners to be able to deliver at least, I don't know, 30 to 40% of our revenue in a couple of years. Whereas right now it's still like 90% done by us and 10% from the partner channel. So we're trying to, because if to double our revenue means we have to have twice as many people. Whereas if you can do it through the partner channel, it increases the scalability because you can train these partners, you can help them onboard their customers with your product. It's a force multiplier. So I think that's the big goal. It's not so much on the individual revenue amounts, or the percentage is important too, but it's the revenue mix. It's having much more of it partner driven. The other goal we have is from a branding standpoint. One of the things that we find a lot being a small company, we're against the very big companies. People may not have heard of us, or like, oh, well, you're not as well known as Microsoft. Well, of course, they're 1,000 times bigger than us. Of course, no one's you've heard of them. So how do we do things in sort of guerrilla ways, like podcasts, like public relations? Can we do things where we can basically get our message out in a more cost-effective way than some of our larger competitors? So I think that's another thing we're trying to do as a force multiplier as well, so that we can increase the revenue and the mix of revenue and the growth, keep the growth rate, and ideally I'd like to get the growth rate nearer to 40% year over year. Because in the software industry, time is finite. If you don't grow at a certain rate, you become that whatever happened to WordPerfect, whatever happened to Lotus 123. We always Excel, we all use Google Sheets now. You don't want to ever be that software where, do you remember what happened to ... And in our industry, it is a bit more of a winner takes all than some other industries. So that is a factor I have to bear in mind.
Yeah, well, and I mean that's great that you've kind of thought doing it through the partners, because then it takes kind of a little bit of weight off your shoulders, right? I mean, it's not all on you and your team.
Correct.
How many people total are on your team? I mean, what's the team that makes up?
We're just under 50 people, of which about over half are in the US, and the other half are scattered around the other geographies I mentioned. And that's mostly full-time. We do have some part-time workers. We've always embraced that ability to have both full and part-time, which has been, I think, good from a family life balance. We have one core value of family life flexibility. So we have an unlimited vacation policy, and we have people who can be full-time, part-time. We have benefits for both part-time workers as well, the same benefits, 401k and medical and stuff. So I think,
oh, that's amazing. You were able to do that, get that in the business model. Good for you. Congratulations.
Yeah,
it is. I know, I mean, for us, we one of the things, just kind of a little off topic, but we wanted, since our business is seasonal, and snow removal, people are just waiting to get called. So we basically were able to keep their benefits going, even if it wasn't snowing, for them, because you realize that's the kind of stuff that keeps great people from leaving, right? And especially
absolutely.
if you want to increase 30% year after year, you've got to keep that great team around. So
And we've had no voluntary turnover in 15 years.
Wow, that's an amazing number. Congratulations on that. That's great.
Well, thank you.
So,
and that's an important part of keeping good people is an undervalued asset. If you look at the tech layoffs and stuff going on in the industry right now, the big tech companies don't see that. They overhire and then they get rid of. They see people as disposable assets. And
I know they're big tech companies are laying people off like crazy right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, it's a shame, but a lot of those people they're just owned by people. I mean, it's all about a bottom line. They've got fractional CEOs. It's how much money can we add by the small percentage to the sheet. They're not seeing people anymore, but that's an advantage you have. You have the people. So do you have any side projects? I mean, is this the only thing you got going, or do you have some other stuff you do? What do you do just to blow off steam? You say, you're doing stuff in the company, but you also want to have a balance of your family life. So if you're not working, what do you like to do?
That's an area where I probably was better before the last couple of years. As the kids have kind of grown up and now left, I'm still trying to. So I think as the kids, until the last 2 years, I mean, it was the kids, getting through college applications, sports, science Olympiad, all the stuff they were doing. That was the life. And now my wife and I are trying to reinvent what does it mean to have free time. So we go for walks, we go bike rides. We've always done that. I always make time for that. I think it's very important. We do travel. We've always my wife and I've always loved travel and going to new places, and she loves the national parks. And I like doing hiking and stuff when I was from the Boy Scout days. So we do a lot of going to national parks and trying to do outdoor activities and do things together. I also like to cook. I love cooking, and I can cook any ethnicity you want. I could probably make it, and I find that when I come up at 5, 6 o'clock. That's something I always try and do. Is that glass of wine or two and some get the cooking stuff out. I find it very therapeutic and relaxing because it's very different. It's tactile. It's not intellectual. I read a lot of novels and books too, and then just general exercise. I haven't got a ton of side projects right now. I still feel like the company needs me, and maybe I'll always have time for some of that. So I don't have as many as maybe I would have done 3 or 4 years ago. That's an area I probably could grow at.
I mean, I don't think, I mean, you know where you need to be, and I can tell you're passionate about what you do. So,
Right.
so I think you don't have to worry about having the project if you don't. It's just kind of a generalized question. So
Oh, no worries.
what's your best dish then? You said you like to cook. So if I was coming over to visit you and you were cooking, what would you choose?
It would depend on what you like, but usually, I mean, something like a coq au vin or beef bourguignon, if you like, European food, or a Spanish tapas dish. If you like ethnic foods, I would do like a Thai curry, a Penang curry, or maybe something like that. Those are sort of things. Like Indian curry, I do a lot of different curries. I can make New Mexican enchiladas. I can do Santa Fe. Yeah, you name it, I can make it. A lot of it's spice level and kind of food, but you name it, I would usually ask. I usually ask my guests, well, I can make this, or this. What do you want? And then I'll make
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, well, I usually eat Italian food. I actually had I am half Italian, but I
Okay.
had uh Indian food. This is kind
Hmm.
of a little off thing for my first time when I went to go see Phil in the UK. I'm 44 years old, and it's the first time I ever had Indian food was when I was
Did you
in
like it?
England. I loved it. I did. I liked it a lot. So I liked it a lot.
It's very
Uh,
common in the UK. I mean, if you go to the pub, it's what you do after the pub. And in America, it's not so easy to get. Like I know when I lived in Boston, there was good Indian food there. A few other places like New York City has some good Indian food. There's San Francisco, but it's not a common cuisine here because not a lot of people from India, work in the restaurant business. In the UK, a lot of people came there in the 1950s from Pakistan and from India, from Bangladesh, and so they set up restaurants there. It was what you did to sort of get a leg up, a bit like the Chinese food here and Vietnamese food here. There just wasn't a huge emigration in the US. So I do miss Indian food. That's why I make quite a bit of it because my wife likes it a lot. But it is great. It's very different and very spicy, and I love it, but not everyone
I
does.
know I liked it a lot. It was I forget what it was called, but it was a chicken dish, and it was delicious. I would get it again. So we are at that time where I asked the question that some people stumble on, but what do you want at the end of the day? What's your legacy? What do you want people to know? Remember you by with the company you've started.
So yeah, with the company in general, I mean, I always believe you want you want to make a difference and you want to make people's lives better, and that ultimately is sort of why I started the company was helping both my workers and employees, the people that the good team that we have, but also a role model that you can run a business without killing the people that work for you. Having worked at other companies, again, not mentioning the name that we did earlier, it just so many companies in America and around the world, they don't treat their people as long-term assets, and I feel like you can build a sustainable company. You can do things a different way, help people along the way, not just the people who work for you, but also the people you're working who are your customers and partners, like the products we did in South America that I mentioned. I just think showing a different way to do business versus the kind of the private equity Wall Street driven world, which everyone's obsessed by that right now. Everyone's obsessed about, oh, I raised $500,000. I'm going to go public in 5 years, and we're going at 90%, and we don't make any money, and I don't even know what our product does. Like, okay,
Yeah.
nice to meet you.
Well, and I do have to say, as I started to get kind of pushed that way by people seeing how quickly I was going to grow, and I personally have ventured down that path, and I kind of pulled away from it because what I realized was taking that option took everything I love about being an entrepreneur away from me. Every decision I get to make, that whether it's a great one or not a great one, being able to quickly pivot and
Hmm.
then change. Okay, I did that. It didn't work great. I'm going to try something different. No, no, that works great. I feel like that would completely go away. And and like I said, it would almost be going back to the whole. It's like I feel like it's my child. It would literally just be like, here, you take my child, and I just can't do it.
Right.
You know?
Well, someone said to me when I asked them about doing this or not doing this, they go, well, do you want a job? I said, no. Well, then why you do it then? If you take the money, once you take that money, you've got a job, which is completely fine. And it makes sense at some point, who knows, maybe we'll get to that point where, life takes you in that direction, but you have to be intentional about it. Once you take that kind of investment, you are basically working for someone else, and that's because it's their money. And that's right. If they're going to spend their money with you, you do work for them. That's actually fine and proper, but no, that's what you're getting into. And so I guess when you ask the tagline, I would say is, It's like the song. I did it my way. I mean, that's sort of, I feel that's why I started the company, because I felt like I was frustrated at other places, not being able to do things that I thought were the right decision. So doing it our way, your way, my way in our businesses, I think is really important. It's that freedom that makes entrepreneurship worth the days when it's not good, when there's a bill that's not paid or a client that's crying on your shoulder or yelling at you. Those days you have all the time, but it's being able to do it your way is what makes up for those days.
Yeah, well, and I'm going to add, by the way, I could have just said, perfect, let's end the podcast, but I don't know if this happens to you where people are like, man, it must be nice to not have a boss. And I'm like, no, 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 I have like hundreds and hundreds of bosses. Every customer I have
Right.
essentially is my boss, you know? So, yeah, I mean, you're always working for someone but you have the ability to solve the problem in whatever way you want when it's your business.
Right. The customer is the boss as opposed to the investor, which is the big difference.
Correct. So, well, I think this was a great show. I had a fantastic time learning about you and your company and your family. And by the way, what is the? I'm going to ask this because I didn't do it, and I don't want your wife to feel left out. You
Okay.
talked about what your kids do. Does your wife still have that job she had, or is she working with you, or is she?
No, we decided for our marital harmony not to have her work at the company. I think that's a good advice for anyone who's got a. I've seen companies and marriages fall apart when they work together. She works for the U.S. government. She works for the Government Accountability Office. They're basically the government watchdog. They make sure that nothing bad happens to the government. They look after your taxpayer money. So they're actually, I think, one of the best parts of the government. I'm not just saying that because I'm married to her, but it is. I mean, they literally make sure that government money in the United States doesn't have corruption, doesn't go to bad things, and I think that's what keeps this country strong, is having that sort of stuff. So I'm very proud of what she does.
Well, good for her, and I'm glad I remembered to ask about her because I would have hated to not, and then her listen to the podcast. Say, you didn't even think about Adam's wife. So, anyways, it was a great time. I appreciate you being on the show, and hopefully we can stay connected and catch up sometime again.
That sounds great. I actually will be coming to Florida at least once this year for a conference in May in Orlando, but I know it's a little bit far from you. But I'll let you know. And thanks so much for having me on the show. It was really great.
Awesome, sounds great.